The fire began without warning. One moment, the east wing of Helion's spire shimmered with its usual golden light, and the next it erupted into a violent wave of blue flames that tore through the metal corridors like a living storm. The palace alarms wailed, vibrating the entire structure, as guards raced to seal off the area. Everyone shouted at once. But in the chaos, one truth became painfully clear. The princess was still inside. Commander Rylan Voss, a human envoy stationed at the palace, had been standing in the outer courtyard when he saw the explosion shatter the windows of the east wing. The bright flash reflected on his visor, and for a moment he simply stared. The energy signature was unmistakable plasma core fire. Hot enough to melt reinforced steel within minutes. Anyone trapped in there would not survive long. He heard someone shout that Princess Ceres had been visiting the botanical chamber in that wing. Several guards froze, unable to move, their expressions full of dread. Others argued about evacuation orders, and one of them insisted no rescue attempt could be made until the fire stabilized. The temperature sensors were already showing fatal levels. Their armor would not last more than a minute inside. Rylan did not wait for orders. He did not think about the danger, the fire, or the ridiculous chance he had of surviving. He sprinted toward the burning structure before his mind could tell him it was impossible. Someone called after him. Another guard tried to grab his arm, but he slipped past them and dove through the half-collapsed entrance. As the flames roared around him, the heat hit him like a physical force. His visor cracked at the corner from the sudden temperature shift, and his lungs felt like they were inhaling fire despite the thin layer of oxygen support in his helmet. He clamped a hand over his mouthpiece, forcing himself to take short breaths. The walls glowed with molten streaks, and sparks rained from the ceiling, but he pushed forward. A chunk of burning ceiling collapsed at the end of the hallway, blocking his path. He lifted a scorched combat shield from the ground. Someone must have dropped it while fleeing and used it to ram through the debris. The metal burned his gloves, and every muscle in his arm screamed. But he kept moving. He knew he had only minutes, maybe less. Princess Ceres had once told him that the botanical chamber was her quiet place, the one part of the palace that felt like a sanctuary. Rylan clung to that detail as if it were a map. He followed the familiar route, even though the floor trembled and sections of the corridor were already sagging under their own weight. His boots stuck briefly to molten patches where the heat had softened the surface. The deeper he went, the stronger the flames became. Blue arcs of plasma flickered across the walls, licking dangerously close to him. Rylan used the shield to block most of the heat, but each step forward felt like walking into a furnace. At a sharp corner, he heard movement. A faint metallic clatter followed by a cough. "Ceres," he shouted, though his voice sounded weak inside the burning hall. He pushed forward and found the princess moments later. She was on the ground, half buried beneath a fallen support beam. Her shimmering silver cloak had caught fire at the edges, though she had beaten most of the flames out with her gloves. Her breathing was shallow, and her arms trembled as she tried unsuccessfully to lift the beam. When she looked up and saw Rylan, her eyes widened with both shock and relief. You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice hoarse. "Good to see you too," Rylan replied, dropping to one knee beside her. "Hold still." The beam was heavier than he expected. The outer layer was molten, and the heat pierced straight through his gloves, burning his palms. He grit his teeth and pushed anyway, feeling the pain spread up his arms like electric fire. Ceres tried to help, but he told her to save her strength. With a shout, he managed to lift the beam just enough for her to slide free. She crawled forward, gasping as she pulled her leg from under the edge. When she finally sat upright, the beam crashed back to the floor, sparks flying everywhere. Rylan grabbed her arm. "Can you walk?" "I think so." She tried standing, wobbling for a moment before steadying herself. "Rylan, you could have died coming in here." "Still might," he said, glancing behind him at the hallway, now completely engulfed in flame. "The exit's collapsing fast. We need to move." Ceres nodded, forcing herself to stay calm. She took his hand without hesitation. Her skin was hot from the surrounding heat, but she held on tightly. Together they moved back toward the main corridor, but the path they had come through had already caved in. Ryland scanned the flickering walls, looking for another route. The smoke was getting thicker, and the heat threatened to overwhelm them. Saris coughed weakly, her breath catching. "There's a maintenance shaft past the hydroponic wall," she said, pointing toward a partially melted doorway. "It leads to the central ventilation pillar. If we reach that, we can escape." That's all I needed to hear. Ryland stepped forward, shielding her with his body as sparks rained from the ceiling. He kicked the warped doorway until it broke open enough for them to squeeze through. The maintenance area was a maze of metal walkways, steaming pipes, and flickering warning lights. The fire had spread here too, though not as violently. Blue flames curled along the walls, and overheating power conduits hissed angrily, threatening to burst at any second. "Careful," Ryland said as they climbed a small staircase. "Watch, the railing looks unstable." Saris kept close beside him, still holding his hand. "How did you even get inside?" The guards said it was impossible. I didn't stop to ask their opinion. Despite the situation, a faint smile touched her lips. "That sounds like you." They reached a narrow walkway where the floor vibrated with the pressure of the failing reactor below. Ryland spotted a square hatch halfway across the walkway. The ventilation shaft they needed, but as they approached, the metal beneath them groaned ominously. "Don't look down," he said. Saris made the mistake of glancing anyway and gasped. The floor below had melted away, leaving only open space and the glowing ruins of the lower wing. A wave of heat surged upward. Ryland tightened his grip on her hand. "Almost there, just a little more." But the walkway gave a sudden violent shudder. A loud crack rang out as the support structure snapped. Ryland reacted instantly. He wrapped his arm around Saris's waist and lunged toward the hatch just as the entire walkway dropped behind them. They landed hard beside the shaft. The walkway collapsed into the lower levels, vanishing in a roar of crackling fire and falling metal. "Are you hurt?" Ryland asked. "No," she said breathlessly. "You saved me again." He didn't respond. There wasn't time. He tore open the hatch door, coughing as a rush of hot air burst from the vent. The shaft was narrow, but the interior walls were lined with rungs. They could climb up toward the safer levels. "You first," Ryland said. Saris hesitated. "But, go. I'll be right behind you." She nodded, gripping the metal rungs and pulling herself upward. Ryland followed immediately, closing the hatch behind them as flames swallowed the walkway completely. The climb felt endless. Heat and smoke chased them upward, and Ryland could hear the metal creaking behind them as the fire spread. His muscles were trembling, and his burns throbbed painfully. But he stayed focused on Saris above him. She was slowing down, exhausted and coughing, but she kept climbing. When they finally reached the upper hatch, Ryland pushed it open and helped her out into the cool air of the central hall. The alarms were still screaming, but the fire hadn't reached this area yet. Guards rushed toward them as they collapsed onto the floor. Princess Saris gasped for breath, her silver hair damp with sweat and soot. Ryland tore off his broken helmet and let the cool air hit his face. The guards looked stunned. No one had expected to see them alive. One of them ran to call for medics. Another bowed deeply, voice shaking. "Commander Voss, how did you survive that?" Ryland glanced back at the hatch, where faint heat still radiated from below. His voice was rough, but steady. "I didn't go in there to survive," he said. "I went in to get her out." Saris turned to him, her expression softening. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The palace burned behind them, the blue flames lighting the hall like a second sunrise, but they were alive, and that alone was enough to change everything. The palace healers worked quickly, but even they struggled to hide their astonishment as they examined Commander Ryland Voss. His arms were badly burned. His gloves melted to the point of becoming part of the fabric beneath, and his breathing was irregular from inhaling hot air. Yet he refused to rest until he knew Princess Saris was safe. She lay on a nearby medical bed, her pale silver hair spread across the cushion, her lungs still recovering from the smoke. Every few minutes she tried to sit up, but the healers pushed her back gently. She kept looking toward Rylan as if afraid he might disappear the moment she closed her eyes. When Queen Melira arrived, the entire hall fell silent. Her gown shimmered like liquid gold, and her presence was enough to make even the seasoned guards stand straighter. The moment she saw her daughter, her composed expression cracked. She crossed the room in long strides, dropping to her knees beside Ceres. "My child," she whispered, brushing soot from Ceres's cheek. "I came as soon as I heard." Ceres touched her mother's hand weakly. "I'm fine. I'm alive because of him. Her eyes moved toward Rylan. Melira followed her gaze. The Queen of Astraeon studied the human commander with an expression that no one else could read. Rylan felt strangely exposed under her stare, but he didn't look away. "Leave us," she ordered the healers and guards. They hesitated for only a second before bowing and exiting one by one until only the Queen, the princess, and the man who had walked into fire remained. The Queen rose slowly, her posture regal, her voice calm but sharp. "Commander Voss, you have done something extraordinary." Rylan forced himself to stand, ignoring the pain in his limbs. "Your Majesty." The fire was spreading too fast. No one else could reach her. "I simply acted." "You acted," Melira repeated, when others froze. "You risked your life without hesitation. Not even my elite guards could have done what you did." "I didn't think about it," Rylan said. "I just knew she was in danger." Ceres's gaze softened. Melira looked between them for a long moment, then turned away as if thinking deeply. The room remained silent except for the distant alarms echoing faintly through the palace. Finally, the Queen spoke again, her tone firm, decisive, the way it always was when issuing royal commands. "Your courage must be honored, and your loyalty must be secured." Rylan frowned slightly. "Secured?" Melira faced him once more. "I will have you married," she declared. Rylan froze. Ceres's eyes widened in shock. For a full heartbeat, no one moved. The Queen continued, "A man who throws himself into a plasma fire for my daughter is someone I cannot ignore. You have proven devotion greater than any noble in this palace." Rylan opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had fought battles on barren moons, survived ambushes in asteroid fields, and negotiated treaties with species far stronger than humans. Yet nothing had prepared him for a queen calmly telling him she intended to marry him into her royal family. Ceres managed to speak first. "Mother, this is sudden." Melira placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Ceres, you know what this means, and you know why I must do this." Her voice lowered. "This was no accident. Someone tried to kill you today." Ceres's breath hitched. "You're sure?" "The explosion was too controlled," Melira said. "Too calculated. Only someone with access to the palace systems could have triggered that reactor." "Someone inside these walls." Rylan felt a cold heaviness settle in his chest. "You believe it was an assassination attempt?" "I know it was," Melira said. "Which means Ceres is still in danger. She needs someone loyal at her side. Someone who cannot be bribed or manipulated." She looked directly at Rylan. "Someone like you." Rylan stared at her, stunned. "Your Majesty." "I did what anyone would have done." "No," Melira said sharply. "Most would have hesitated. Most would have waited for orders. But you ran into death itself." Her expression softened only slightly. "Humans are unpredictable. Stubborn. Impossible to control. That is precisely why you are the safest shield for my daughter." Ceres looked conflicted. Grateful, yes, but also overwhelmed by the weight of her mother's expectations. "Rylan," she said softly, "you don't have to agree. My mother speaks from fear, not just duty." "That fear is justified," Melira said, "and this is not only about protection. Today you have become a symbol. The people will speak of the human who saved their princess. Rumors will spread. Whispers of prophecy. In a time when our political enemies grow bold, symbolism matters." Rylan rubbed the back of his neck, unsure what to say. He had never sought attention. He had certainly never imagined becoming part of a royal family. He looked at Cerys, whose silver eyes reflected both hope and uncertainty. "I didn't save you for reward," he said quietly. "I know," she whispered. Melira stepped closer to him. "This union will protect my daughter. It will strengthen the loyalty between our worlds, and it will stabilize my kingdom at a crucial moment." Ryland felt the weight of her words, heavy as armor. "I need time," he said honestly. The queen gave a small nod. "You have until the next cycle begins." But then her voice sharpened again. "However, the engagement will be announced immediately. For your safety and hers." Rylan opened his mouth to protest, but Melira raised her hand. "Someone tried to kill the princess once," she said. "They will try again. And now that you have become a hero, you are a target as well." Her voice lowered. "Announcing the engagement will make it harder for our enemies to act openly." Rylan closed his mouth slowly. He understood. This wasn't a simple royal declaration, it was a strategic shield. Melira turned to her daughter. "You should rest. Both of you. Tomorrow will be difficult." She swept out of the room, leaving them in heavy silence. Cerys looked toward Rylan again. He could see fear in her eyes, but also a strange, warm gratitude. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "She shouldn't have decided so suddenly." "She's trying to keep you safe," Rylan said. "I can't blame her for that." Cerys sighed, brushing soot from her sleeve. "Still, a marriage announcement between us? That's a lot to place on you." Rylan gave a small, tired smile. "I walked through fire. I guess I can handle awkward politics." She laughed softly, a fragile but genuine sound. "Thank you for coming back for me. I mean it, always," he said without thinking. The moment the words slipped out, they both felt something shift, something unspoken but unmistakable. Cerys turned away, her cheeks warming, though whether from heat or something else, Rylan could not tell. Before either of them could say more, a guard re-entered and bowed. "Commander Voss, the Queen requests your presence in the strategy chamber. She says it is urgent." Rylan nodded. "I'll be there." He turned toward Cerys. She reached out and lightly touched his wrist. "Be careful," she said softly. "I will," he replied. As he followed the guard through the palace corridors, Rylan's thoughts raced. The fire had been only the beginning. Someone inside the palace wanted Cerys dead. Someone with access, resources, and a motive strong enough to risk destroying part of the royal fortress itself. And now he was tangled in the middle of it. When he reached the strategy chamber, Melira was already waiting, surrounded by holographic maps of the palace. She didn't bother with polite greetings. "Commander Voss," she said, "I'm going to tell you something that few people in this kingdom know." Rylan stepped forward. "I'm listening." 2. "The attack on Cerys was planned weeks ago," Melira said. "We intercepted coded messages hinting at a coup forming in the shadows of my own court." Rylan stiffened. "Who is behind it?" Melira turned toward the largest hologram. The face that appeared was stern, sharp, and unmistakably royal. "The Astral Regent," she said. "My own family elder." Rylan stared at the image. "Why would he target Cerys?" "Because she stands between him and the throne," Melira said. "He believes my daughter is not strong enough to rule. He wants to take control before she ascends." Rylan clenched his fists. "So he tried to kill her. And he will try again," Melira said. "Which is why I need you at her side. Officially. Publicly." Rylan took a steady breath. "If I do this, if I accept the engagement, what happens then?" Melira met his gaze, her eyes fierce and unwavering. "Then," she said, "you will help me expose the traitor who dared to threaten my daughter." Rylan exhaled slowly, understanding the weight of the role he was stepping into. "I'll do it," he said. Melira nodded once. "Good. At dawn, we announce the engagement. And after that, we prepare for war in the shadows." Far away, in her quiet medical chamber, Cerys lay awake, thinking of the man who had saved her life twice in one day. The flames had changed everything. Her future, the kingdom's future, even Ryland's future. And the real battle had only just begun. The sun had barely risen over the spires of Astrion, when the palace was already buzzing with activity. Rumors of the human commander's heroics had spread through the corridors, whispered in awe by servants, guards, and minor nobles alike. Ryland Voss walked alongside Princess Ceres, moving toward the royal council chamber where the engagement announcement would take place. Both of them felt the weight of every gaze upon them. Ryland was calm outwardly, but inside, a storm of doubt and anticipation churned. Ceres tried to keep her composure, her silver hair neatly braided for the occasion. Her thoughts kept returning to the previous day's firestorm, to the moment Ryland had dragged her from molten death. She had never been so close to losing her life. And now, the man who had saved her stood beside her, not as a protector, but as a symbol of future husband chosen by her mother. As they entered the council chamber, the atmosphere shifted. Nobles straightened, their eyes sharp and measuring. Some looked impressed, others skeptical. It was one thing to survive fire, another to marry into royalty, and humans had long been considered fragile, untested in the ways of Astrion politics. Queen Melira waited at the far end of the room, her posture flawless, her expression serene but commanding. She gestured for them to step forward. Today, we formalize the bond between worlds, between human courage and Astrion heritage, she announced. Her voice carried easily, echoing off the walls. Commander Voss, will you accept the engagement to Princess Ceres? Ryland straightened his back. The eyes of the entire palace seemed to bore into him, but he remembered the fire, the beam, the smoke, and Ceres's frightened eyes. He swallowed the fear of politics and spoke clearly. I will. The room buzzed with a mixture of whispers and subdued applause. Ceres's cheeks warmed as she looked at him. She nodded quietly, saying nothing, her gratitude and hesitation both evident. The ceremony ended, but the real challenges were only beginning. Later that day, Ryland was summoned to a private chamber, a place where the queen kept her inner circle of advisors and intelligence reports. Holographic displays floated in midair, showing schematics of the palace, security logs, and surveillance data. The attack on Ceres was only the beginning, Melira said, her tone deadly serious. The astral regent has been gathering allies quietly, preparing to seize power. His network is vast, and he has influence in every corner of this city. Ryland studied the data. The level of infiltration was alarming. Servants, minor nobles, and even palace guards had been compromised. How do we stop him without causing panic? He asked. Melira's expression did not change. We act from the shadows first. We expose him only when he is vulnerable. That is where you come in. Your presence as Ceres's betrothed will protect her in plain sight. But you must also work quietly to uncover his allies. Ryland nodded, understanding the delicate balance. Protect the princess publicly. Hunt the traitor privately. It was a dangerous task, but one he had faced before in battles across distant worlds. Only this time, the stakes were personal. Over the next few days, Ryland moved carefully through the palace. He trained with the guards, learning the strengths and weaknesses of the human-alien hybrid soldiers, and familiarized himself with the palace's layout. He and Ceres also spent time together, ostensibly to grow closer for the engagement, but also to prepare for the challenges ahead. Ceres proved to be more than a princess. She was intelligent, brave, and quick to grasp strategy. She asked questions about Ryland's tactics, about the traits of humans that made them resilient. Ryland was impressed. You're learning fast, he said one afternoon as they reviewed security reports in her private chamber. I have to, Ceres replied. I may be in danger again, and I need to know how to survive. They shared a quiet laugh, a brief relief from the tension surrounding them. But even in those moments, Ryland sensed eyes watching them, subtle movements indicating the presence of spies and traitors. He began compiling a list of palace personnel whose behavior seemed odd or secretive. One evening, as they walked through the palace gardens, Ryland paused at a small fountain. The water reflected the twin moons overhead, shimmering softly. Saris stood beside him, her expression thoughtful. "Rylan," she said quietly, "do you ever wonder if this is all too much? That we're stepping into a game we can't control?" Rylan turned to her. "I've survived worse than palace politics. The fire yesterday was proof. And I'm not alone in this. We'll face whatever comes together." Saris nodded, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. "I hope you're right." The next day, Ryland's suspicions began to pay off. A minor guard, someone who had been unusually fidgety and secretive, was caught sneaking toward the restricted levels of the palace at night. Confronted by Ryland and the loyal guards, the man tried to resist, but Ryland's training and reflexes were too fast. Under questioning, the guard confessed to working for the Astral Regent, providing intelligence about Saris's schedule and the Queen's security plans. Ryland reported the findings to Mylera. She listened carefully, her expression unreadable. "This confirms what I suspected," she said. "He has placed many spies within these walls. We must root them out before he can act again." Over the following weeks, Ryland and Saris worked together to identify more conspirators. They moved cautiously, never drawing attention. Ryland was careful not to expose Saris unnecessarily, knowing that her safety was his highest priority. One night, Ryland received a message through a secure channel from an anonymous source, a warning that the regent had planned an attack on the palace library. The library contained critical historical records, including treaties and the secret locations of royal armories. Losing it would cripple the Queen's ability to respond strategically. Ryland acted immediately. He alerted the palace guards and led a small team to the library before the attack could occur. They found the regent's agents already there. Attempting to access the restricted vaults, Ryland's presence caught them off guard. In a swift and precise maneuver, he disarmed the first intruder, dodged a plasma blade from the second, and subdued the third with a well-placed strike. By the time the palace reinforcements arrived, the library was secure, and the regent's agents had been captured. Ryland stood among the scattered books and smoldering data terminals, his chest heaving, but his expression calm. Saris arrived shortly after, having followed his instructions from a secure observation post. She looked at him with awe and concern. "You didn't have to put yourself in danger again," she said softly. "I did," he replied. "If someone wanted to harm this kingdom, I couldn't wait for orders. I had to act." "You're remarkable," Saris said. "Humans are usually underestimated here, but you've proven that courage doesn't belong to one species." Ryland smiled faintly. "We're stubborn. We survive. That's all." The regent, however, was growing desperate. His attempts at subtle manipulation had failed, and now he had to consider more direct measures. Ryland and Saris knew this. Every movement in the palace, every whisper in the halls, was now tinged with danger. One evening, while Ryland and Saris were reviewing security plans in her private chamber, a small explosion shook the palace. Smoke filled the corridor outside. Ryland reacted immediately, drawing his weapon and moving toward the source. Saris followed, though she remained behind him, trusting his lead. They found a minor guard post destroyed, the fire quickly contained by palace drones. The attack was symbolic, meant to intimidate rather than harm. But it served its purpose. The regent was sending a message. He was still in control, still dangerous. Ryland knelt beside the rubble, scanning for clues. "This was a warning," he said grimly. "He wants us to know. He can strike anywhere, anytime." Saris placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we must be ready. We can't let fear control us." Ryland looked at her and saw determination, the same courage that had survived the firestorm. He realized that together, they were stronger than any plot or weapon. Humans might be underestimated, but human courage was unpredictable. It was a quality that could turn the tide in impossible situations. For the first time since entering the palace, Ryland felt a sense of purpose beyond duty. He had saved a life, yes, but now he was part of something larger, a battle to protect a kingdom from its own shadows. And in the process, he had formed a bond with a princess who was not just royalty, but a partner in strategy. a witness to his courage, and perhaps something more. As night fell over Helion Spire, Ryland stood on the palace balcony, looking at the stars beyond. The twin moons reflected in his eyes as he considered what lay ahead. The regent was plotting, allies were hidden in plain sight, and the next move could be deadly. But he would not falter. Not while Cerys, not while the kingdom, depended on him. And deep down, he knew that no matter the darkness, humans had a way of shining against all odds. The palace was tense. Rumors of the regent's plans had spread quietly, and loyal guards were on constant alert. Commander Ryland Voss stood in the strategy chamber with Princess Cerys, reviewing every possible entry, exit, and hidden passage within Helion Spire. Every hallway, every ventilation shaft, and every security drone's patrol path had been accounted for. Yet despite their preparation, both of them knew that a single mistake could be fatal. Queen Melira entered the room without announcement, her expression sharper than ever. "The regent will strike tonight," she said. "He is desperate, and desperate men are dangerous." Ryland nodded. "We've identified his agents. We're ready for any move he makes." Karamar. Karamarmar. The queen's eyes softened briefly as she looked at her daughter. "Cerys, you must stay close to Ryland. Tonight, courage and strategy will both be tested." Cerys swallowed, gripping Ryland's arm lightly. "I will. I trust you." Even as the words left her lips, a chill ran through Ryland. He had seen battles where trust could be as deadly as a blade, but he could feel her sincerity. Tonight, they were not just fighting for strategy or politics, they were fighting for survival. As night fell, the palace lights dimmed, creating long shadows in the grand halls. Servants whispered among themselves as loyal guards took positions throughout the corridors. Ryland moved with quiet precision, his senses heightened. The slightest sound, the faintest movement, could signal danger. Suddenly, a faint shimmer along the eastern corridor caught his eye. He motioned for Cerys to stay back and advanced slowly. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, agents of the regent. They had plasma blades drawn, and their armor glimmered in the dim light. Ryland's training took over. He didn't hesitate. With swift movements, he disarmed the first attacker, dodged the second, and pushed Cerys behind him as the third swung at him. Sparks flew as the blades collided with his shield. The fight was precise, efficient, and deadly. Within moments, all 3 agents were subdued and secured. Cerys stepped forward, awe in her eyes. "You make it look easy," she said. Ryland gave a small smile, though he didn't lower his guard. "It's never easy. You just get better at surviving." The encounter confirmed what they already suspected. The regent was escalating. He would not stop at intimidation or sabotage. He was moving to seize the palace, to remove the queen and claim the throne. Ryland and Cerys moved to the central hall, where the royal family would hold a gathering in case of a public attack. They discussed contingencies with the loyal council members and palace guards, planning every possible scenario. The tension in the air was thick, but the determination in the room was stronger. Hours passed, and the palace remained eerily quiet. Then, just past midnight, alarms blared. Explosions rocked the West Wing. Ryland and Cerys raced toward the source, the floor shaking beneath their feet. They found the regent's mercenaries breaking through the outer defenses, moving with coordinated precision. The battle that followed was unlike anything the palace had seen before. Plasma beams cut through walls, sparks rained from the ceiling, and guards shouted orders over the chaos. Ryland moved like a force of nature, his shield deflecting deadly strikes while his instincts guided him to protect Cerys at every turn. Cerys, despite her initial fear, showed courage that matched her father's legacy. She coordinated defensive positions, directed guards to weak points, and even assisted in subduing a few attackers with precise timing. Ryland watched her with pride. She was not just a princess, she was a leader, a strategist, and a partner in battle. They pushed through the chaos, making their way toward the regent, who had retreated to the throne room, the symbolic heart of his attempt to claim power. The room was a wreck of broken furniture, shattered crystal, and scorched walls. The regent stood there, a cold, cruel smile on his face. "So the human dares to follow me," he sneered. Ryland stepped forward, placing himself between Cerys and the regent. "This ends tonight," he said firmly. "You cannot stop what is coming," the regent replied. "The palace will be mine. The queen will fall, and you will die." Ryland's eyes narrowed. He didn't answer with words. He acted. The fight began. The regent was skilled, wielding advanced weaponry and moving with agility that was almost unnatural. But Ryland's human stubbornness, his ability to think unpredictably and adapt instantly, gave him an edge. He dodged, countered, and pressed forward with relentless determination. Cerys stayed close, assisting when possible, but primarily observing and learning. She understood that her role was to survive and support Ryland, ensuring the palace remained under loyal control. The battle raged across the throne room. Sparks from clashing weapons flew. Holographic displays cracked under stray plasma beams, and the very structure trembled. The regent's attacks were calculated, but Ryland anticipated each move, using momentum, strategy, and the environment to his advantage. Finally, with a decisive maneuver, Ryland disarmed the regent, knocking the weapon from his hands. The human's shield absorbed the last strike, and the regent fell to his knees, defeated but alive. Guards moved quickly to restrain him, securing the traitor before he could recover. Ryland looked at Cerys. She was trembling, not from fear, but from the intensity of the moment. Her eyes were wide, and she took a deep breath, realizing that the immediate threat had passed. The palace was safe. The regent's network had been dismantled, his agents captured, and the queen's authority reaffirmed. Loyal guards moved swiftly to secure every corridor, ensuring no further surprises. Queen Maelira entered the throne room, her expression a mix of relief and pride. She approached Ryland and Cerys, her eyes shining. "You have done what I feared might be impossible," she said. "You saved the princess, the palace, and the legacy of Astrion." Ryland bowed slightly. "It was a team effort, Your Majesty. The palace guards, Princess Cerys herself, we all played a part." Maelira smiled faintly. "And yet, it was your courage that made the difference. The human who ran into fire now stands in the eye of the storm and did not falter." Cerys stepped forward, placing her hand on Ryland's arm. "You didn't just save me, Ryland. You saved all of us. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he said quietly. "Just stay safe. That's thanks enough." The queen, seeing the bond between the human and her daughter, made her final decision. "Ryland Voss, you have proven your loyalty and bravery beyond measure. I honor your courage and your heart. As promised, the engagement will stand. But it will be more than a political shield. You have earned your place beside the princess." Ryland's eyes met Cerys's. There was understanding, respect, and something deeper, a connection forged in fire, danger, and unwavering courage. The palace began to return to normal in the days that followed. Repairs were made to the damaged wings, and the court slowly adjusted to the presence of a human now officially engaged to the princess. Ryland trained with the palace guards, learning their ways and sharing his own skills. Cerys continued her studies, becoming more confident in her ability to lead and protect herself. Together, they formed a partnership that was more than political. They learned to trust each other implicitly, to anticipate each other's moves, and to rely on courage and intelligence over brute strength. The people of Astrion began to speak of the human and the princess as symbols of unity, courage, and resilience. Ryland reflected often on the fire that had begun it all. A single act of bravery had changed everything, not just his life, but the fate of a kingdom. And now, with the regent defeated and the palace secure, he could finally allow himself to think about the future. One evening, as the twin moons cast their silver light over the palace, Ryland and Cerys stood on the balcony together. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of flowering gardens below. They were quiet for a moment, letting the calm wash over them after weeks of tension, fear, and battle. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" Saris asked softly. Rylan looked at her, a faint smile on his lips. "Running into fire for a princess I barely knew? Every day." Saris laughed, a light, genuine sound. "And yet, here we are." "Yes," Rylan said, looking out over the city. "Here we are, alive, stronger, and ready for whatever comes next." Saris turned to him, her eyes reflecting the twin moons. "I think we'll be all right. Together." Rylan took her hand in his, holding it firmly. "Together," he agreed. In the quiet that followed, they knew the palace, the kingdom, and their lives had changed forever. Courage, loyalty, and human resilience had triumphed, and though challenges would come again, they were ready. Not just as a commander and a princess, but as partners, united by fire, trust, and unwavering will. And so, Helian's spire stood tall once more, a beacon of hope and courage, shining across the stars. The human who had walked into flames had survived. The princess had been saved, and the kingdom had endured. Stronger than ever. For Commander Rylan Voss and Princess Saris, the future was no longer uncertain, it was theirs to shape.